If you've spent the last few weeks scrolling through endless synth demos, watching YouTube breakdowns, and still can't decide whether the next keyboard you buy will actually fit into your workflow, this review is going to clear that up for you. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. I've been talking to a handful of gigging keyboardists, bedroom producers, and even a couple of teachers who were torn between a classic analog rig and a modern multi-engine synth, and the Nord Wave 2 kept popping up as the maybe toetobetru option. Let's see if it lives up to the hype, or if you'd be better off spending that budget elsewhere. First off, the Wave 2 is marketed as a 4-part performance synth that blends virtual analog, FM, wavetable, and sample playback. That sounds like a Swiss Army knife of sound design, but the real question is, how does that translate to daily use? For a touring musician who needs to switch patches on the fly, the hand-sun layout is a genuine time-saver. Every section oscillators, filters, envelopes has its own dedicated rotary knob and a clear OLED display that tells you exactly where you are. In a live setting I've watched, players can jump from a lush pad to a gritty FM bass in under 2 seconds without diving into menus. That immediacy is the kind of practical strength you only notice when the lights are low and the setlist is tight. On the studio side, the 48-voice polyphony might sound generous at first glance, but you have to factor in how the 4 parts share those voices. If you're layering a complex wavetable lead over a sample-driven rhythm and a virtual analog pad, you'll quickly find the polyphony split 3 ways. In practice, most users I've spoken with keep their arrangements fairly lean 2 or 3 active parts at once and the voice count feels ample. The built-in 1 GB of sample memory is another point that often trips people up. Nord's Sample Library 3.0 comes preloaded with a solid collection of drums, textures, and one-shots, but if you want to load your own multi-gig libraries you'll hit the storage ceiling fast. For most gigging scenarios you won't need more, but a producer who relies heavily on custom sample packs might find the internal memory restrictive unless they invest in an external USB drive. Now, who should actually consider buying the Wave 2? If you're a keyboardist who performs live and needs on-the-fly sound morphing, the dedicated controls and 4-part architecture are a huge win. I've heard from a jazz fusion trio that they use the aftertouch on the 61-key keyboard to add subtle vibrato to solo lines, while the other 3 parts handle a looping synth bass, a percussive sample groove, and a shimmering pad that follows their chord changes. The ability to split the keyboard into zones and assign each part to a different layer means they can pull out a full arrangement from a single instrument, which cuts down on rack space and setup time. If you're a bedroom producer who spends most of your time in a DAW, the Wave 2 can still be a valuable addition, but only if you value the tactile experience and the specific synthesis engines it offers. The virtual analog section is warm and responsive, great for classic analog-type sounds, while the FM engine delivers those metallic, bell-like textures that are hard to emulate with software plugins without a steep learning curve. The Wavetable engine is more limited compared to dedicated wavetable synths like the Serum, but it gives you enough palette to create evolving textures without loading external modules. On the flip side, there are clear reasons to skip it. First, the price tag sits well above the entry-level synths that hobbyists typically start with. If you're on a tight budget and your primary need is a solid piano or a straightforward synth lead, you'll get more bang for your buck from a dedicated digital piano or a classic analog monosynth. Second, the sample memory limitation can be a deal-breaker for producers who rely on large, multi-gig sample libraries. Nord does support external USB drives for sample playback, but the workflow isn't as seamless as dragging and dropping files in a software environment. Finally, the 4-part architecture, while powerful, can feel overwhelming for someone who isn't comfortable juggling multiple timbres at once. If you usually work with one sound at a time, you might never tap into the full potential of the instrument and end up paying for features you never use. Let's talk about the hidden trade-offs that often get glossed over in marketing videos. The Wave 2's OLED displays are crisp and readable under stage lights, but they also consume a noticeable amount of power. In a gig that runs on battery packs, you'll need to budget for extra power solutions, especially if you're also powering effects and mixers. The aftertouch on the 61-key keyboard is responsive, but it's not as deep as the polyphonic aftertouch you'd find on a high-end controller. It's limited to channel aftertouch, which means the entire keyboard reacts uniformly. That's fine for most expressive playing, but if you need per-note pressure sensitivity, you'll have to look elsewhere.